we had at Camp Kennedy. And we had probably near on 80 men singing that in the hall at Camp Kennedy on Sabbath morning. And I tell you what, I don't know how the roof's still on that place, but it was just fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, 192.
I know that my nice and I told me this thing is in thy kingdom and join of my glorious light out. I sing thee. Thank you. I way the sleep I
Hello. Hello. Just fine.
God, my soul.
We've got time for one more. How about one more? Welcome, Kelly. 511, 511.
I know God's wondrous grace. Let me go. Oh, be in the His own, but I know. Lord, be in my heart.
Hello, mic test.
But
Testing. Hello, testing. Testing.
to keep that which I believe. I know that must be unleashing and see. I know then this to keep which I know my Lord may come, and I may glory, my Lord come, glory, again, my Lord. To keep that which I believe to him against.
The first time that I met Geoff Youlden was at the Warwick Civic Centre, I think it was, when he's running a mission in there, and I was one of the ushers. Was it the Warwick? Was it Warwick?
Toowoomba. Is it that or Toowoomba? You took,
No, up in.
oh, yeah, up there.
Yeah,
yes.
I think it's Warwick Civic Centre there.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. And you know, he hasn't changed much. I used to have the same colour hair, so you got. So.
No, it's going.
very fit and healthy. Okay, I'll hand you over now, Master Geoff, and
Thank you.
welcome to Mount Barker.
Good. It's a good place to be. Yes, nothing wrong with that.
I'm trying. I'm still trying.
Nothing wrong with that. Well, thank you everyone for inviting us to come to Mount Barker. I know the road pretty well these days. Been down here so many times, which is wonderful. I know where all the toilet stops are, and which is as you get a bit older, that becomes an important thing. Yeah, that's better, isn't it? Benji, are you right? Are you right, Benji? We are going to encourage you to invest in some cameras and lighting, huh? During the day, it's all right, but obviously at night, it's not so good, is it? while I'm down here, not only are we down here, but I'm staying here for the week because in Harvey next Sabbath, we have a number of non-Adventists coming to a dinner, and so we're looking forward to that. Little Church of Harvey, and which is lovely. I don't know whether you've ever asked yourself some of the questions that I have asked myself, and I'm sure you have. How long are we going to keep saying that Jesus is coming soon? You know, we've been, all of us here, we've been saying that for a long time. Is that right? Mm-hmm. And, you know, another question, how long is it until Jesus comes? We see plenty of signs at the moment, don't we? And I was very glad that we prayed for the people of Gaza, and we just can't imagine how terrible that would be in a place where you can't get out, and then every moment you could get a bomb dropped on you. I mean, the fear, it would just be terrible. And even though that most of them are Muslims and they don't know Christ and have a very different outlook on life to us, but nevertheless, they are human beings, aren't they? And I just don't know where, of course, no one knows where it's going to end, but it's a sign. You know, Ellen White says that before Jesus comes back, thousands of cities are going to be destroyed. And we can begin to sense how that can happen. So, and that's going to be very fearful for those that are involved. So when we think about the coming of the Lord and how long is it going to be until he comes, who's going to finish the work? Is that us, or is God going to step in and finish it? These are some of the questions that go through our minds as we think about what's happening in the world today, and also as we study the Bible. Now, it's my purpose over the next 5 meetings. We have 2 more tomorrow morning, and then 2 on Sunday, I think, isn't that right? And lunch in between. So we give you a reward for coming out on Sunday. Oh, I guess we give you a reward tomorrow too, don't we? 2 lunches. And those of you who were late tonight, missed out on beautiful soup, and it was lovely, just very light tea, which is just perfect, I thought. So thank you for the ladies particularly who go to a lot of trouble on weekends like this, so we appreciate it. Now, these are the questions that I want to try to endeavour to answer over this weekend. One of the most wonderful studies in the Bible is the study of types. Now, do you know, I understand what I mean by types. The lamb is a type of whom? Of Jesus, isn't it? We have Adam is a type of whom? Jesus, the second Adam. We have so many thrilling illustrations in the Bible of types and what we call antitypes, or the reality, because God gave us lessons so that we can understand the bigger picture. For example, the sanctuary. Moses built the sanctuary in the wilderness, didn't he? And that sanctuary was built on a pattern showed to him from heaven, so that we clearly understand today that there is a sanctuary in heaven, and the one on earth was a pattern. Just exactly what that word pattern means, I don't think that we ought to conclude that in heaven there is a box just like Moses built. I think that would be being a little bit foolish. The same as when we say Jesus is a lamb, we don't think that Jesus had wool, do we, on him? And he didn't have 4 legs. There are some things about the type which are important for us to understand, and some of the sanctuary. But the reality is there is a sanctuary in heaven. That is for sure. And so God has given to us a lot of illustrations so that we can understand the realities. Because you see, let me tell you a story that happened some years ago. I went to Taronga Park Zoo. If you've ever been to Taronga Park Zoo, it's one of our best zoos in Australia by far. And someone had given this little monkey a little mirror. It was only very small, but he had it, the monkey had it in his hand. And we watched as this is what he was doing, holding it in his hand, he was doing this. And every time the monkey was just too quick for him. Gone, see? And I stood there and we sort of laughed to ourselves about it, and as you would. And then we went away, and then we were coming back that way, and the monkey was still going like this. Now, I could have explained to him that actually there's not another monkey there at all. It's his picture. Do you think that I could have used language to be able to help him to understand that? Could I? I could be there 1,000 years and he'd be no wiser, because his brain is not capable of understanding it. Get the idea? And that's the problem that God has with us. In talking about many things, he's got to use illustrations. He's got to use types so that at least we can have some idea of what God is, the message that God is trying to get across to us. And so that's why I think the study of types is a very, very fruitful study. Just come over to the book of Luke. I want to read the first few words or verses of Luke, the first chapter. I don't know whether you've ever read this, because it's very interesting, because it helps you to understand what Luke, the Gospel of Luke, is about. So you've got Luke chapter 1. Luke was, what job did Luke have? Yes, he was a doctor. And Luke was not an apostle, was he? Was Luke an apostle? No, he wasn't. And he says in verse 1 of chapter 1, inasmuch as many have taken in hand to set in order a narrative of those things which have been fulfilled among us. So he's admitting that quite a number have written about Christ. Just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word delivered them to us. In other words, Luke is admitting that he wasn't an eyewitness, but he got his information from eyewitnesses. Then it says in verse 3, it seemed good to me also, having had perfect understanding of all things from the very first, to write to you an orderly account, most excellent Theophilus. So Luke is setting out why he wrote his gospel here, and he's writing it to who? Theophilus. By the way, Theophilus means lover of God. It comes from two Greek words, theos, God, and philos. That's where the word Philadelphia comes from, and so forth. It comes from Philadelphia is known as the city of love, and comes from that Greek word. So here Luke is saying that I also have had perfect understanding as I have listened to the eyewitnesses, and I have written it down because I've written a very orderly account of the life of Christ. Now, then verse 4 explains to Theophilus the reason he wrote, that you may know the certainty of those things in which you were instructed. So what's the purpose of Luke writing his gospel? What's the main reason? It's to give Theophilus, who obviously was probably a young man, he wanted Theophilus to have a very clear understanding so that you may know the certainty of the things in which you believe. I believe that certainty is very, very important. And of course, the devil is out to take away our certainties. Because, for example, if you doubt the Sabbath, let's say, and you're not quite sure the Sabbath is right, you've got some big questions in your mind regarding the Sabbath, let's say. If it comes in your life that you lose your job and you have to then find another job, and the only job that you can find is a job that requires you to work on Sabbath, and you're not certain really about the Sabbath, do you think that you're going to last? Do you think that you're going to keep the Sabbath? Never. So the greatest desire of the devil is to unsettle God's people. Because once you have questions in your mind regarding any of the truths, you're finished. Because the devil, as soon as you get into a situation, but what about so-and-so? It comes back to your mind all the time. And it's quite a tragedy, even in God's church, that we find people who will question and bring uncertainty into people's minds. And but here the Bible says the certainty. Now, if you come back to Psalm 48, God, through David, wrote a very interesting statement. Psalm, in the middle of the Bible, Psalms, Proverbs, chapter 48. And we want to have a look at let's go down here to verse 12. We'll start. You got that? Psalm 48, verse 12. It says, walk about Zion. Who was Zion? Who's Zion? Israel, that's right. If we have Zion today, we refer to the church. Walk about Zion, it was Israel back in those days, and go all around her, count her towers, mark well her bulwarks, consider her palaces, that you may tell it to the generation following. For this is God, our God forever and ever. He will be our guide even to death. Now, here, what God is saying through David is that we're to go about Zion, the church. We're to go all around her, count her towers. In other words, what would a tower have been back in those days? When it comes to building a city, what would the tower be? Yes, it was the watch house. It was part of the structure of the building. And then the next line says, mark well her bulwarks. What's a bulwark? It's an old expression, isn't it? Yes, we may use the foundations, the pillars. That's it. Yeah, the pillars, which of course go down to the foundations. Now, what's being said here? God is inviting us to have a look at the church or have a look at Zion and check out what makes it what it is. Check it out. Count her towers. Mark well her bulwarks. Consider her palaces, that you may tell it to the generation following. We have a responsibility to pass on the message to the next generation. And Sometimes I get worried when I hear what's going on in some places. Because if our children do not understand what we believe, no wonder they get washed away. And we need to explain to our children what actually makes us what we are and why we're different to other churches. And so it's the purpose over the next couple of days that I want to deal with this question of looking at Zion's bulwarks, her foundations, to see as we examine them, to find out whether we can tell the next generation about it. We've got confidence enough to share it with the next generation. I was in Darwin many years ago now, but when Cyclone Tracy came, and I will never forget the devastation when I came back into Darwin the following day after Boxing Day, I think it happened. And saw the devastation, because we had been in Darwin and just left we had finished our stint in Darwin and we were going down to Adelaide. And I got down to Brisbane and the news came through, of course, of the cyclone. I was on the first plane that went in. We were able to get permission to get back into Darwin. Of course, they weren't wanting people to go into Darwin. They were trying to get people out at that stage. But I'll never forget as the plane, because the radar at the airport had been knocked right out. So the aeroplane came down and it was on site. So it was very low and I could see the trees and the buildings very, very clearly. And I could see that there was hardly a leaf left on trees for miles and miles out of Darwin. And it reminds me of the fact that we've been told that a storm is coming, relentless in its fury. And everything that can be shaken is going to be shaken. That's why unless we have full confidence in what we believe, then we're going to be shaken out. There's no question about that at all. And folk who have a very cursory view of the Bible and never study the Bible, there's no question that they will be thrown out. You can't survive because it's going to be relentless in its fury. And I don't know what all that fully means. But we're given a glimpse of things. And I think that what's going on in the Middle East at the moment is a glimpse of the type of thing that's going to happen. And you can understand how, if God's people are regarded as the cause of all the problems in the world, how relentless the people will be against us. And so it'll take every commitment, every prayer that we've ever prayed in our lives to keep us faithful through that period. I remember the story of Michael Faraday. Now, Michael Faraday was the great English chemist and physicist. And he was invited to take a lecture in Albert Hall. Now, if you've ever watched, some of you may know, never been to Albert Hall, but it's that round building that you often see when they have what do I call it, in June every year, when they sing Rule Britannia. Proms, that's right, the proms, that's it, thank you. If you've ever watched the proms, and it's an interesting night to watch that, very good music and so forth, but they hold that in Albert Hall, holds about 10,000 people. And it was named in honour of Queen Victoria's husband, Prince Albert. And Michael Faraday was invited to lecture to all the greatest minds in Europe and England at that time on the electromagnetic current and force. And after he had given his lecture, there was thunderous applause. And then Prince Charles, who later became Edward VII, got up and he thanked Michael Faraday for the masterful lecture. And of course, everyone expected Faraday to come back in to acknowledge what the Prince had said. But he never appeared. You know why? He had timed his lecture to finish so that he could walk down to the little prayer meeting that was held that he went to every Wednesday night. And he timed his lecture so that he had enough time to deliver his lecture and then get to the prayer meeting. And when he was about to die, not far off dying, someone said to him, "Michael Faraday, what is your latest speculation?" He said, "I don't talk about speculations these days. I only deal in certainties." And that's what we need to be thinking about, the certainties of our faith. 2 Peter, please come with me over to the back of the Bible. 2 Peter, chapter 1. 2 Peter, chapter 1. Comes Peter, then James, Timothy, James, and then Peter comes, and we want 2 Peter. There's two books of Peter. 2 Peter, chapter 1 and verse 4. It says, "By which have been given to us exceeding great and precious promises, that through these you may be partakers of the divine nature, having escaped the corruption that is in the world through lust." Then come down to, well, perhaps we ought to just read verse 1, not pass over verse 1. Simon Peter, it says, a bondservant and apostle of Jesus Christ, to those who have obtained like precious faith with us by the righteousness of our God and Saviour, Jesus Christ. And then down in verse 10, he says, "Therefore, brethren, be even more diligent to make your call and election sure. For if you do these things, you will never stumble." And then verse 12, "For this reason, I will not be negligent to remind you always of these things, though you know and are established in the present truth." Now, what's present truth? That's a rather interesting expression, present truth. You see, there are things in the Bible that are true only for a period of time. For example, if I came preaching tonight that the world is going to be destroyed by a flood, like Noah did, would that be true now? No. It was true when Noah preached it, wasn't it? But it's not true now. It was present truth in Noah's day, but it's not true now. If I preach the same message that John the Baptist preached, wouldn't be present truth now. The same message that Lot preached about Sodom and Gomorrah, that wouldn't be true now. It was present truth when he preached it. If I preached or someone preached the message of Jonah that Nineveh is going to be destroyed, that wouldn't be true now, would it? It was, but it's not true now. And so there are some things in the Bible that are true for a period of time. And the message that is present truth for us is contained in the three messages of Revelation chapter 14. That's what we call present truth. That's the truth that's to be preached just before Jesus returns. And it's interesting that Peter goes on to say in verse 16 of the same chapter, For we do not follow cunningly devised fables when we made known to you the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, but were eyewitnesses of his majesty. Now, wait a moment. How could Peter be an eyewitness to the coming of the Lord? He's been dead a long time. But he says here, for we did not follow cunningly devised fables when we made known to you the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, but were eyewitnesses of his majesty. How was Peter an eyewitness to the coming of the Lord? Well, he was. And I heard someone say it, when Christ was transfigured. Because you'll remember that they saw two men. Who were the two men that they saw? Moses and Elijah. Because, as he's saying, we were eyewitnesses to his majesty. They saw Jesus transfigured. That's what it means to be transfigured or to be changed. They saw him on the Mount of Transfiguration, changed to the extent that they saw him as he will be when he comes back a second time. The idea? Because up until this stage, Jesus was just like everybody else. Because his divinity was clothed with humanity. But on the Mount of Transfiguration, he was changed. Every now and again in the life of Jesus, divinity flashed through humanity. When is one of those illustrations? When can you tell me that divinity flashed through humanity in the life of Jesus? Yes. I'm thinking of a perhaps more visible. Yes, the cleansing of the temple. Remember, you imagine Jesus going into the temple and upturning those tables and driving them out, picked up a whip, and the people just drew back. Now, if he had been an ordinary man, they would have overthrown him, overcome him. But they sensed. That's why they scattered, because divinity flashed through humanity. And as I said, there were a few incidents in the life of Jesus where that was revealed. And certainly at the Mount of Transfiguration, that's when he was changed or transfigured. And that's why Peter can say here that we were eyewitnesses to the coming of the Lord. Because those two men, Moses and Elijah, represent the two groups of people who are going to be there at the coming of Jesus. Moses represents those who have died and will be resurrected at the coming of Jesus. And Elijah represents a whole generation who will not die before Jesus comes back. And then he goes on to say, verse 18, and we heard this voice which came from heaven when we were with him on the holy mountain. And so we have the prophetic word confirmed, which you do well to heed as a light that shines in a dark place until the day dawns and the morning star arises in your hearts. Now, what he's saying here in verse 19 is that the prophetic word is even more sure, that's what the old King James says, is more sure than what we saw with our eyes. We witnessed the transfiguration of Jesus, but Peter's saying here, prophecy is even more sure than what you see with your eyes. You know, people often say to you, but I saw it myself. And what do they mean when they say that? I saw it with my own two eyes. What are they trying to tell you? That's right. It's real. I saw it. That's what they're saying to you when they say that. But Peter here is saying that the prophetic word of the Bible is even more sure than what you see with your eyes. Because even a good musician can deceive your eyes. Is that right? Yeah. I've watched some of these magicians from time to time, as you do. And I'm going to watch to see where he pulls that rabbit out. But he gets the rabbit there and you don't see how he gets it there. They're just so quick. And so our eyes can be deceived, but prophecy, you can't argue against prophecy. And that's why those of us who are preaching in the public platform, we use prophecy because it is a very, very convincing thing. When we can show people what God wrote down thousands of years ago, and we're all very familiar with Daniel 2, which is a wonderful, wonderful chapter and helps people. And so I want to give reasons for our faith in tomorrow and Sunday as we go through. And as we said, the study of typology is very, very wonderful. Now, let me give you an illustration of this typology that Paul uses. Come over to 1 Corinthians chapter 10, and I'll give you the basis of why I'm taking this series. 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Here is the biblical basis for this. 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Moreover, brethren, verse 1, I do not want you to be unaware that all our fathers were under the cloud and all passed through the sea. All were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. What's he talking about here? What sea? Yeah, the Red Sea. Yes. All ate the same spiritual food. What's the spiritual food? Manna, and we'll talk about that tomorrow morning. All drank the same spiritual drink. Think of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. Yes. But with most of them, God was not well pleased, for their bodies were scattered in the wilderness. And you will remember that every person that left Egypt died before they got into the promised land, except who? Joshua and Caleb, the only two. And God was not very well pleased with them at all. Then he makes this statement in verse 11. Now, all these things happened to them as examples. All right? And they were written for whose admonition? Our admonition, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. In other words, God has written those stories down, particularly for the children of Israel. They have been written down as an illustration for those of us who are living in the days just before Jesus comes back. So one of the greatest types in the Bible is Israel in the wilderness compared to modern Israel in the wilderness of this world. God is calling us out of spiritual Egypt to wander in the wilderness to go through to the heavenly Canaan, just as he called God's people from Egypt into the physical wilderness, into the physical land of milk and honey. So this is the basis by which I want to continually remind us of why this study and in front of them was what? The Red Sea, and behind them was Pharaoh and his army. And they thought they were in a trap. And you can imagine the fear that went through all of those people. And they whined and complained to Moses, as was their habit. And why have you brought us out here to die in the wilderness? It would have been better if we'd stayed in Egypt. And then eventually God, remember, brought the confusion among the Egyptian hosts. They couldn't see where they were going, and they were all drowned in the Red Sea. And in the morning, the bodies were washed up on the shore, and the people saw their enemy had been destroyed, and they broke out into the Song of Moses. But God's people in the last days are going to, by the way, if you want to read the Song of Moses, you look up Exodus chapter 15. You'll read the words of it. Miriam composed it. And Moses. We're going to add a stanza that they didn't sing. And that stanza is called the Song of the Lamb. Because we have passed through an experience that no other generation has ever passed through. Sing the Song of the Lamb. And this is a song of the Advent people. How do I know that? Because the only people that get the victory over the beast and over his mark and so forth are the Advent people in the last days. We're the only ones in the world preaching that message. There's nobody else. Because this is a message for the Advent people. And those who, of course, come and join us will be part of it too. But this is the message of the Adventist message, a message of great victory. Now, it's interesting about this generation of the children of Israel that God predicted that they would be victorious. Just come back to Genesis with me, Genesis chapter 15, Genesis at the beginning of the Bible, chapter 15. Genesis 15. And we'll pick up verse 13, yes. Verse 13. Then he said to Abram, know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs. Remember, this is long before the children of Israel go to Egypt. And God is making a prophecy here. He says, then he said to Abram, know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and will serve them, and they will afflict them 400 years. So here's a prophecy where God is saying to Abraham, your descendants are going to go into captivity for 300 years. Or 400 years, sorry. Thank you. 400 years. And yes, I'll just seeing whether you're awake. If I go to sleep, you can excuse me because we're 3 hours ahead of you. And yeah, it's a big difference now for 3 hours. It's only 11, yes. That's right. So, and you'll remember that at the time of Joseph, how the children of Israel went down into the land. And you know the wonderful story of Joseph, one of the most amazing, moving stories there is in the entire Bible is the story of Joseph meeting his brothers. There's no probably more emotional, powerful story than that story. And well, they were in Egyptian captivity for 400 years. And you can appreciate after 400 years, how much of the truth do you think was still in their hearts? How many generations would that be? 4, 8, 4 fours? Would there be 4 generations in 100 years?
Generations 40 years, isn't it? There's 410 generations.
Well, it could be. I don't know. Back in those days, I know Moses lived to 120, but whether others all lived that length of time, I don't know. But anyway, whatever it was, let's say it was 10. What do you think's happened to the truth after 10 generations? You think of your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren. Just about wiped out. And then on top of that, when it comes to the Sabbath, the Egyptian Pharaoh made it impossible for them to keep the Sabbath. Why? Yeah, they had to work. And remember, he felt that they were getting a little bit slack, so he then withdrew the straw from them. So they had to make bricks without straw to make it more awkward for them. And they were beaten and whipped when they failed to make as many bricks as they should have been making. And by this stage, the Sabbath had been forgotten. So the first thing that we noticed, that when God led his people out of Egypt, it was a reformation movement, because he brought them out to teach them the truth again, because the message of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had just about been wiped out. And so the Exodus movement was a reformation movement. And so by the 4th generation, as it says there in verse 16, but in the 4th generation they shall return here, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. Now there, that would suggest that each generation is how long? 100 years, wouldn't it? Now, what's the reason why God didn't take them straight into the land of Canaan? What is it? This is very important for us. What's the reason given in verse 16 that God allowed time to go on and didn't give them the land immediately? When it says the iniquity of the Amorites were the largest group of the Canaanites. And so they are mentioned as representative of all the Canaanites. When it says, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete, what's that mean? Yes, in other words, not all the Amorites and the Canaanites had heard about the truth. And it was God's purpose that the children of Israel be his evangelists in spreading the message. But of course, as we know, they failed up. And God had told Abraham through prophecy that it would be 400 years. And that's exactly what happened. I'll just show you something, because this is important to have a look at chapter 15. And as we've just read there, because the iniquity, the 4th generation, the iniquity is not yet full. Now, that's a very wonderful explanation as to why Jesus hasn't come back yet. This helps us to understand this point, that God is giving to every person the opportunity. And all we can say is, because we don't know, but we would believe on the basis of this, that there's more opportunities going to be given for them to fill up their iniquity. And then God is going to step in and say, enough is enough. But he's going to give every person an opportunity to repent. And so that's a very significant statement there. Now, if we go over to Exodus chapter 12 and verse 40, again referring to this period, Exodus 12 and verse 40, it says, now the sojourn of the children of Israel who lived in Egypt was 430 years. Now, is that a mistake? No, because the extra 30 years includes the time when Abraham was in Ur of the Chaldees. But the 400 years is what the children of Israel had, as it mentioned back in the other verse. And God says these things happened unto them as examples. Now, verse 41 then makes a very interesting statement when it says, and it came to pass at the end of the 430 years, on that very same day, it came to pass that all the armies of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. So here the Bible is stressing something that's important, that 400 years they went out of Egypt, not by chance, but on the very day that prophecy hundreds of years before had predicted that it was going to happen. The very Bible emphasis, the very self-same day, not just the year, but the self-same day they left Egypt. So it wasn't just by chance, it was part of prophecy. Now, that's why God has given to us a message that's based on time too. What's the chapter in Daniel that gives us the time period that our message is based on? Look, just come over to Daniel quickly, Daniel 8. Daniel chapter 8, and let's just read this in this context. Many of us find Daniel a bit hard to understand, probably only because we haven't really studied it seriously, because it's not that hard to understand, but it's not just a casual reading of a few verses. This is Daniel 8 and verse 14. Well, perhaps we ought to get back to verse 12. Daniel 8:12. Because of transgression, an army was given to the horn to oppose the daily sacrifices, and he cast truth down to the ground. He did all this and prospered. Now, you would think that if this power was a truth-opposing power, that God would not allow it to continue on. But here, because of transgression, an army was given over to the horn to oppose, and he cast the truth to the ground. He did all this and furthermore prospered. You would think that if a power was against God, that God wouldn't allow it to prosper. But here the Bible says this power was going to prosper. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to that certain one who was speaking, how long will the vision be concerning the daily sacrifices and the transgression of desolation, the giving of both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot? In other words, just as the Exodus movement, the truth of God had been trampled down all of those years, so the Bible is saying in the last days, God's sanctuary and his truth are going to be trampled down. And it is at the end, verse 14, and he said unto me, for 2,300 days, then the sanctuary will be cleansed. In other words, God's truth and the sanctuary are going to be trodden down until the end of this 2,300 prophetic days or years. And when that arises, then the sanctuary is going to be restored and truth is going to be restored. In other words, just as the Exodus movement was a reformatory message, so God's message in the last days is a reformatory message. Just as God's message back in the Exodus movement arose on time, so God's message in the last days arises on time. It's not just someone got an itch in the middle 1800s about doing something. No, it was part of God's plan. And you know, one of the most amazing things I find when I study our pioneers is how insightful they were, how they didn't have other books, they didn't have others to help them work this out. It was their study of the Bible under God's inspiration that led them to discover what we today believe is wonderful truth. And these men were marvelous, marvelous men. I don't know whether perhaps tomorrow we can sing that song, The Judgment Has Set. You know that F.E. Belden wrote that. F.E. Belden and his wife were amazing people. Do you know that he would listen to the sermon, and while the sermon was going on, he would write the music and the words to that hymn. That hymn was written while a preacher preached. And at the end of the sermon, instead of the congregation singing the final hymn like we do, which is nothing wrong, instead of doing that, his wife would get up and sing the song. That's the caliber of people. How many musicians have we got who can do that? You know, write the words, write the hymn within the hour, and then sing it at the end, and have a beautiful hymn like The Judgment Has Set. You know, you remember the music? We'll sing it tomorrow. Beautiful hymn. And that's a real Adventist hymn. And God had a wonderful men, just as he had amazing people in the Exodus movement, so in this message, God has raised this message up to be the reformatory message of these days. And as we explore tomorrow, we will get involved with the different things that God brought upon the children of Israel for them to do. And we'll notice the first one tomorrow morning, first up, and the second or so in the second service. So may God help us as we begin to do this study. It's a wonderful study. I tell you, the more you read about the Exodus, there's so much in the Bible about the Exodus. Just about every book of the Old Testament talks about the Exodus. It was such a big, big, big event. And we need to study more of it. It'll do our hearts a lot of good. Let's just bow our heads in prayer. Now, Father in heaven, I just pray, Lord, tonight as we go to our sleep, that your blessing will be upon us. Thank you for your word. Thank you for prophecy, which gives us so much certainty and surety. And I pray, Lord, that tomorrow, as we study more, that you will bless us and help us to understand more of your great love for us. I pray for Christ's sake. Amen. All right, we'll see you. What time is it? 9:30? Yes. All right.
Same meeting code.
I'm the only one that's allowed to sleep in.